When people picture a medieval army, they picture something specific. Iron armor, war horses, flags in the wind, men built from stone, eating stone, sleeping on stone, invincible. History class handed you that image and you kept it. But the reality was much harder than anything you were taught. Medieval armies were being destroyed by something every person watching this considers a completely solved problem. Not the enemy's sword, not plague, not the arrow, the ground. A single winter night on frozen English earth, or on the stone floor of a mountain garrison, or in an open French field in October, pulled heat from a sleeping soldier faster than any weapon ever could. Whole campaigns ended not in battle, but in bivouacs. Men who could not get warm enough to stand could not fight. Men who could not fight were dead weight. Dead weight became dead. The armies that survived, the ones that marched through brutal English winters, that garrisoned stone fortresses at elevation for months without relief, that slept in the open before major battles and stood up to fight in the morning, were not the ones with the most wool. They were the ones who knew something specific about how heat moves through the ground, something that costs nothing, something that is still physically present in every pile of dead leaves you have ever walked past without looking twice. There's one thing those soldiers placed between themselves and the earth before they lay down. Not a blanket, not an animal hide. Something that every modern camper steps over and ignores. The reason it worked is not obvious. That answer is 30 seconds from now. Every technique a medieval army used was not tested in comfortable conditions. It was stress-tested by famine, siege, and winter working together for decades at a stretch. If a technique failed, soldiers died, not struggled, died. William the Conqueror ordered the harrying of the north in the winter of 1069 into 1070. The monk Orderic Vitalis, writing in his Historia Ecclesiastica around 1140, documents that campaign in detail. Orderic describes English winter conditions during that operation as lethal to the civilian population across a vast stretch of northern England. William's own forces operated in those same temperatures, across that same territory, and survived in sufficient fighting strength to continue the campaign through spring. They carried no purpose-manufactured sleeping equipment. What they carried was knowledge, a tradition of field survival that had been passed down in writing since the Roman military and copied continuously for 700 years after that. The castles where that tradition was applied are still standing. You can walk through them today. The stone walls of Croix des Chevaliers in Syria, documented in detail by historian Hugh Kennedy in his 1994 Clarendon Press publication, Crusader castles, are intact after 8 centuries. The garrison that lived inside those walls through Syrian mountain winters, where temperatures at elevation dropped well below freezing, did not survive because someone came along and preserved their methods. They survived because the physics does not expire. What kept a soldier warm in 1250 keeps a person warm tonight. The stone did not change. The cold did not change. The air trapped between dried plant fibers did not change. You cannot invoice a pile of dead leaves. You cannot send a quarterly bill to a field. What you can do is sell someone a sleeping bag and replace it every few years when the zipper fails. That is the complete economic logic. Nothing was buried. Nothing was hidden. The billing cycle simply had no room for free. But here's the part that the outdoor equipment industry has spent a long time making feel unnecessary. How the technique actually worked, and exactly why it still does. That is what comes next. This is not a new idea. The Roman military manual, Epitome Rei Militaris, written by Flavius Vegetius Renatus around 390 CE, is the most copied military text in the entire medieval period. The historian Christopher Almond, in his 2011 Cambridge University Press publication, The De Re Militari of Vegetius, The Reception, Transmission, and Legacy of a Roman Text in the Middle Ages, documents over 300 surviving manuscript copies from the medieval period alone. Every major European military commander had access to it. What it said about keeping soldiers alive through cold conditions was not optional reading. It was doctrine passed directly from Roman practice into the armies that built the castles you recognize as medieval. In Book 3 of that manual, Vegetius wrote specifically about the priority of keeping soldiers separated from cold ground during overnight rest. He framed it as military readiness, not comfort. A soldier who lost his core warmth to the earth overnight was not capable of full fighting effectiveness at dawn. A garrison that lost significant numbers to cold before a siege even began had already ceded ground to the enemy without a weapon being raised. The solution he documented, using dried plant material as a thick layer between the soldier and the ground, was not folk practice. It was applied physics, written down, copied 300 times, read by the commanders of every major medieval army in Europe, and used in campaigns from England to Syria for over 1,000 years. At Agincourt in October 1415, English soldiers spent the night before the battle in open fields near the village of Maisoncelles. The historian Anne Curry, in her 2005 Tempest publishing book, Agincourt, A New History, Documents that the English forces were exhausted, soaked from days of continuous rain, and camping in the open on the night of 24 October. October nights in northern France reached temperatures near freezing. Those soldiers fought one of the most documented battles of the medieval period the following morning. The fields around Maisoncelles were agricultural. Dried plant material was everywhere. The ones who made it through that night knew exactly what to do with it. The Vegetius tradition, Anno Domini 390, copied 300 times, present in the hands of every major medieval military commander for 1,000 years after that, and almost nobody is using it. In the years following the Spanish-American War of 1898, the United States Army Quartermaster Corps undertook a systematic standardization of field-issued equipment. The Quartermaster Corps historical records, held at the National Archives in Washington, document the shift toward issued wool blankets, canvas tents, and later purpose-manufactured sleeping equipment as standard soldier kit. These products worked. No one is arguing otherwise. But they did something the Vegetius tradition had never done. They replaced a skill with an object. A soldier who knew how to build ground insulation from available materials could stay warm in any landscape without a supply chain. A soldier issued a wool blanket needed that blanket to be present, dry, and in his hands. One system required knowledge, the other required procurement. One of those is easier to invoice. The global outdoor and camping gear market was valued at over 35 billion United States dollars in 2022, according to a 2023 market analysis report published by Grand View Research. A standard 3-season sleeping bag from a major outdoor retailer currently costs between $80 and $350. A sleeping pad costs between $30 and $150. The average household that spends time outdoors in cold conditions replaces this equipment several times over a decade. Medieval soldiers paid nothing. They used the field. Every single one of them solved this problem without paying anyone. Without a bill, without a supplier, without a service contract. Not wrong, inconvenient. You cannot sell a subscription to dried leaves. You can sell a sleeping bag, and a pad, and a tent, and the replacement zipper for the sleeping bag, and the new pad when the foam compresses. The billing cycle simply did not have room for free. The knowledge became optional. Then it felt unnecessary. Then it stopped being passed down. Then the equipment got more expensive. What the Crusader garrison at Crac des Chevaliers understood about this, and what you're about to do tonight for nothing, starts with one specific fact about heat and the thickness of a single layer of material. It is simpler than anything on any equipment shelf. You have seen this your whole life. Walk through a forest in autumn and press your hand down into a pile of dead leaves, not the top, deep toward the center of the pile. It is warmer in there, not a little warmer, noticeably warmer. That is not decay, that is trapped air. The leaves hold thousands of tiny pockets of still air between them. Still air does not conduct heat well, moving air does. The difference is the same difference between standing still in a cold room and standing in a cold wind. The room is bearable, the wind cuts through you. The pile of leaves is a room for heat. Nothing moves inside it. Your warmth stays. You have picked up a bale of dry hay and noticed how light it is for its size. That lightness is air. Dry hay is mostly air held in position by plant fibers. Press your body into it, and you press into a layer of still air that has nowhere to go. Your body heat stays near you instead of flowing into the ground. Every time you have layered 2 shirts and felt warmer than one thick shirt would make you. That is this exact principle. The air between the 2 layers did the warming, not the fabric. The fabric trapped the air. The air did the work. Medieval soldiers were not doing anything exotic. They were using the field they were already standing in. Most people who try this get one step wrong. It is always the same step. It is the very first one. And it is the exact mistake that separated medieval soldiers who survived winter campaigns from the ones who did not. Here is what you need. Nothing you have to buy. Dry plant material, dead leaves, dried grass, dry bracken, pine needles, straw, dry hay, any plant material that has lost its moisture. The test is simple. Grab a handful and squeeze it. If it clumps and stays clumped, it is too wet. If it shuffles and crumbles like dry paper, it is ready. You need enough to make a pile the length of your body and about as wide as your shoulders. The pile needs to be deep enough that when you push your hand down into it, you cannot touch the ground underneath. The depth of your forearm from elbow to wrist, uncompressed. That is your minimum. You need your existing clothing, specifically anything with a loose outer layer over a closer fitting layer underneath. A jacket over a shirt. Any combination with a gap between the 2 layers. You need approximately 20 minutes to set it up. That is genuinely it. Here is the one thing most people get wrong. They pile the material beside them and lie directly on the ground. They use the debris as a covering, something that goes on top, like a blanket. That instinct kills people. The ones who froze in medieval winter campaigns did not fail because they lacked material. They failed because they put it in the wrong place. Vegetius addressed this directly in the Epidema Rei Militaris. He was explicit about the priority of ground separation over overhead covering. The ground pulls more heat from a sleeping body than the open air above does. The physics reason is straightforward. Ground-body contact transfers heat through direct conduction, the same way a cold metal spoon pulled from the freezer takes heat from your hand the moment you touch it. The air above you takes heat by radiation, which is a much slower process. In plain terms, the cold underneath you works faster than the cold around you. The pile goes under you first, all of it, if you only have enough for one layer. The covering on top is secondary, never optional, but secondary. Here's what this looks like when done correctly. Gather your dry material and build the underlayer before you do anything else. Pile it, press it down with your hand. Pile more on top, press again. You are trying to make a consistent layer. Not a pile with thin spots and gaps, but an even surface you can lie on from shoulders to heels. When you lie on it, your weight will compress it. That is expected. You need the starting layer deep enough that, even compressed under your body weight, it still holds some air between you and the ground. Roughly the thickness of your closed fist, uncompressed, is your minimum target. Then pull material loosely over your legs and torso, not pressed tight. Loose. A loose pile of leaves settles over you and traps air between every layer. Leaves pressed flat against your skin have lost most of that air. The covering should be as thick as you can make it while still keeping it loose. Then pull it over your core and your feet. Feet last. Core first. The next step is the one that most modern guides leave out entirely. It is also the step that Vegetius documented as the specific difference between a winter garrison that held and one that failed. And it is what medieval soldiers in the field did that no sleeping bag instruction manual has ever mentioned. Take a handful of dry plant material, dried grass or leaves or straw, and stuff it inside your outer clothing, between your jacket and your shirt, around your torso, not your arms, your core. The warmth your body produces comes from the center. An inch of dried grass packed around your midsection and held in place by your outer layer insulates your core the same way a padded vest does. This is not decoration. This is the load-bearing step of the technique. At the temperatures where the pile alone keeps you alive but uncomfortable, this step takes you from uncomfortable to genuinely warm. You run a hand check at the end. Reach under your back. If you can touch the ground, the layer is too thin. Add more material underneath before you sleep. That is the only test you need. No tools, no thermometer, just your hand. One person, one night. No cost. What a group of 4 people does with this technique, and what a medieval army of several hundred men did with the same principle every winter campaign for 3 centuries, is the part that changes how you think about cold and survival in a permanent way. 4 people sleeping in a tight cluster, each on a debris layer with material pulled over them, generate enough combined body heat in a shared space to raise the temperature noticeably above the temperature of the surrounding air. This is not theory. Medieval soldiers slept in grouped formations deliberately, not for comfort. Jean Froissart, writing his chroniques between approximately 1370 and 1400, describes English and French soldiers in winter quarters, sleeping in tight grouped arrangements. That was thermal management. 4 bodies close together produce 4 times the heat. The debris insulation traps it. The group geometry keeps it circulating. Vegetius describes in Book 3 of the Epitoma Rei Militaris the organization of field camps around the Contubernium. A group of 8 soldiers sharing equipment and sleeping space is the basic unit of Roman and later medieval field organization. 8 men using grouped debris insulation in a rudimentary field shelter can maintain survivable temperature at ambient conditions that would kill a single person sleeping alone. This is the full technique as medieval armies used it. Not one person, not a neat individual camping scenario. 8 people on debris beds in a grouped formation, sharing heat, surviving conditions that modern equipment catalogs describe as requiring expensive technical gear. No bills, no supply chain, no asking anyone's permission. There's one condition where this works less well. Medieval commanders recognized it too. The way they adapted is the last thing in the script: wet. When plant material absorbs water, it loses its air pockets. The fibers press together. The thermal resistance drops sharply. Wet leaves against your body do almost nothing. This is not a flaw unique to this technique. Wet down insulation loses most of its warmth. Wet wool still performs, but poorly compared to dry wool. Wet synthetic fill compresses and stiffens. Every insulation system that relies on trapped air, and every insulation system does, fails when the air is replaced with water. The physics is the same, regardless of the price tag. Vegetius addressed this directly. He recommended that soldiers build a simple raised platform of cut branches to keep their sleeping material off the ground, allowing any ground moisture to drain downward rather than wick upward into the debris layer. In terrain with available timber, which describes most of medieval northern Europe where these campaigns were documented, a platform of crossed branches elevated the debris by a few inches and protected its dryness from below. For rain from above, dense conifer cover was the primary solution. The historian Jim Bradbury, in his 1992 Routledge publication, The Medieval Siege, references winter campaign field discipline in multiple documented medieval sieges that included exactly this kind of elevated sleeping arrangement as standard practice. In conditions of sustained heavy rain with no canopy cover and no available branches, an open field in a downpour with nothing but wet ground for miles, this technique performs poorly. Medieval armies in those conditions moved to the nearest available built shelter as a first priority. A barn, a ruin, the undercroft of a church. Any roof was preferable to an open field in rain. The debris technique was what they used when no built shelter existed. That is its correct use today. Not the only solution. The solution for when all other solutions are absent. The walls of Crac des Chevaliers are still standing. The garrison that wintered inside them survived because they understood the same physics you just learned. Orderic Vitalis' account of the harrying of the North is still in the British Library. Vegetius' manual is still readable in over 300 manuscript copies held in libraries across Europe. The physics he wrote about has not changed by a single variable since he wrote it in the year 390. What you built tonight costs nothing. It needs no supply chain, no battery, no replacement part, no service contract, no annual renewal. The dead air in a pile of dried leaves does not care what year it is. I don't know what brought you here. It doesn't matter. It works either way.